For the Washington Examiner, I'm Siraj Hashmi, and this is Hashing It Out. I'm joined by Eddie Scarry, who's my colleague here at the Washington Examiner, commentary writer, as well as author of the new book, Privileged Victims: How America's Culture Fascists Hijacked the Country and Elevated Its Worst People. Eddie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, for those who aren't aware, what exactly is a privileged victim?
Well, so the book is about this new class of people that we have in this country, and what they have figured out and also have been learned, they've been taught by our culture, which includes academia, college campuses, it's everywhere, is that if you want to advance your own interests, if you want to get ahead in any kind of way, it can be money, it can be you want a new job, you want national attention, you want national fame, you simply claim to have been aggrieved, victimized, oppressed, and it's not just any kind of victimization. It's always about it's always based on your gender. It's always based on your race or your sexuality or any combination therein of those three. You can get a lot of attention this way. You can get jobs this way. You can get money this way. And again, this is the concept that our culture is reinforcing. That's why when I say the culture fascist, I'm talking about Hollywood. I'm talking about the national news media. I'm talking about it's in our politics, namely in the Democratic Party, though somewhat in the Republican Party too. And then again, it starts with in academia. It's spreading throughout the college campuses. They're the ones teaching this, and it's an actual ideology. It's called social justice. So that's what I mean when I say privileged victim.
What inspired you to write this book?
I wrote the book because I believe probably most of the country was confused about, it seemed as though I was the last one in America that wasn't discriminated against or victimized by anything. And, I'm a gay Latino, and I would have just as much right to claim that as anyone else who feels that they're oppressed by nature of being a minority, whether it's sexual or based on their sexuality or their race. I have as much claim to that, or I believe I should, and yet I never thought, why isn't anybody asking me? Why don't I feel like I was oppressed or victimized or aggrieved based on these things? And then I started looking into it, and I found out, well, again, this is an ideology. This is something that's taught on college campuses, that there is an inherent flaw with America, and that there is like this oppressive quality about the country. And I think the number one, and that's the way everything is framed anymore. It's framed in Hollywood, in almost every Hollywood movie, in every national news story you see. It's always who's the victim here and who is the privileged. You would see it in a good example would be the Covington high school kids, based on just a clip that went around on the internet. Journalists had determined, this is a story of privilege versus victim. It's the white straight males, presumably, the students, even though they were underage, they could determine this. And then you have the elderly American Indian, and they say, that's it. He's the victim here. He's the oppressed. It turned out that was not the case. But so that's seeing these things in cases like these, I thought, what's going on here? Is there a pattern, or all of these just kind of one-offs? Are these all isolated incidents? And no, it's not. This is what our culture is teaching now. And again, it comes from academia, this social justice stuff that they're now teaching in colleges across the country. So
it's almost like a feeling of missing out, really.
Yes, I think I could have possibly been a lot further along in my career if I knew from the beginning. You know what? If I had only said I'm a gay Latino and I've been victimized by it.
Well, maybe you could be victimized by this podcast. Well, you open the book by highlighting how the worst ideas and people, particularly, are rising to the top and staying in the spotlight. First of all, what do you mean by this? Who is really, what type of ideas are rising to the top, and what type of people?
Well, the type of ideas, it can be it can be something, like the Brett Kavanaugh fight. This is how the left is fighting this country, and by the way, reinforced by our culture that says this is right, this is okay to do. They determined that they didn't want to see a Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. They don't like his ideas. They don't like that would likely be a conservative justice. So, let's take him down. How do we take him down? Well, let's put the victim forward. It's a woman who says that she was basically a Me Too, even though it was a claim from 30 years ago. So when we talk about the ideas rising to the top, or the worst people rising to the top, it's cases like that, and not necessarily just that rising to the top. It can be tearing people down as well.
And you mentioned Brett Kavanaugh, obviously, because that was a huge contentious fight in 2018. when Justice Anthony Kennedy announced he was stepping down from the Supreme Court. And, the Me Too movement, it comes into focus in your book. And you write that it started off earnestly and served a noble purpose,
Right.
but has since been corrupted. How do you feel it's been corrupted?
Well, that's what social justice does to everything. It corrupts anything and everything it touches, even a noble cause like Me Too. That started for the people like Harvey Weinstein, Al Franken, people who there were legitimate claims against them that they had been doing these things for years, multiple women, and not only just multiple women, but you had evidence, you had strong evidence. In the case of Harvey Weinstein, it was the audio recording where he's in a hotel in New York, and the model is asking him, why did you touch my chest? And I didn't like that. And he's saying, I didn't, I'm just used to doing that kind of thing. Come to my hotel. I'm gonna take a shower. Come into my hotel. And that's pretty strong evidence that he did something, even though I suppose and then on top of that, he admitted it.
Yeah.
Initially in the
and
New
there
York
was that
Times.
New York sting operation too.
Right, there was a sting operation, but when you have himself in the initial New York Times report saying, "I'm sorry, I did this, but I'm going to direct my attention now to the NRA."
Right, it's always the NRA.
Right, and then thereafter he denied it. I think someone should have let him know that that's not the way this works. You first deny it, and then maybe later you have to admit it when faced with irrefutable proof. But he tried to do it the opposite way, which was to admit it and then take it back. The same thing I think with Al Franken. The former senator, he admitted to what he did. There was a photograph of his hands on the chest of this woman who appeared to be unconscious.
Leanne Tweeden.
Right, and then a number of claims come out. So when you have things like that, that's Me Too, and you are taking down someone in power that deserve what's coming to them. But again, social justice got a hold of it. It became, believe all women. That was the Hillary Clinton doctrine. That's the Hillary Clinton standard. Believe all women. So any woman could come out. And that was setting the stage for the Christine Blasey Ford incident with the Brett Kavanaugh. It was, you have to believe her, right? You have to, because she's oppressed. She's victimized. She's aggrieved. That's an all-encompassing thing, is you have to believe all women. You see this happening, and you almost take down a Supreme Court nominee for this. You see people who have had their lives ruined, their jobs taken away from them. They're forced to basically disappear from the public eye. And then on top of that, you have, of course, it's even probably worse on college campuses, where you have now a Me Too is to say, I regret what I did. I regret that I got drunk, and we may have made decisions that we both regret. That simple regret is now supposed to be Me Too.
Yeah, you mentioned in particular there are a few cases. First of all, University of Virginia, the Rolling Stone, what was it, 2014, 2015, the UVA rape case. It was a highly, very graphic in detail, and it all turned out to be false. It was not corroborated by the reporter at the time. Would you say that was the one thing that sort of kicked it all off?
Kicked off the Me Too movement, or
not kicked off the Me Too movement, but I mean, we all know that Harvey Weinstein kicked off the Me Too movement. This was very pre-Me Too, about 3 years prior to it. But at the very least, it sort of perked everyone's ears up.
Right, yeah. And I think that, yes, because that's where the whole, it made it nationally kind of a national concept of rape culture on campuses. I think in the case of the Rolling Stone controversy, that was more of a media story, and it said a lot more about what's going on with the media. Again, this is the story that they tell day in and day out. It's the privilege versus the victim. That's what that dynamic is, what kind of motivates them in every part of their coverage. So I think that, but what we saw there is this is how the national media perpetuates this culture. They say, you know what, if you claim to have been victimized or aggrieved based on your gender, in this case it was gender, sexuality, your race, you can get ahead. And the journalist certainly knew that. She bought this story, Sabrina Erdely. She bought this story, hook, line, and sinker. She said, this is the story. I know that this is what is going on in this country. Tells the story, doesn't really do much fact checking there. Made her a celebrity overnight, famous, now been exposed as a fraud, but unfortunately for her. But again, that's how you see the elevation of the worst ideas, the worst people.
There are also some cases that happened post Me Too, or at least, I mean, Bill O'Reilly, he was pre Me Too. And then you have Roger Ailes, Matt Lauer, Aziz Ansari. Those are post Me Too, but you have a little bit more skepticism about their particular cases. Let's just start off with Bill O'Reilly. What was wrong with his particular case, in particular that made you think not everything here is what it seems?
Right. Well, if you look at all the public reporting that was done on the case of Bill O'Reilly, the worst case scenario of what, or I guess the worst interpretation you could have of what the evidence suggests is that he would tell women that wanted contributor roles at Fox. That I think all but maybe one of them that accused him was actually even, or maybe two actually worked at Fox that accused him.
I believe it was two.
Right, and then the rest of them they wanted contributor roles, which is very lucrative, a very nice job that you get in addition. You get a bunch of money, and you get it's in addition to whatever your full-time job is if you have a full-time job. They wanted these roles, and he apparently would promise them, these are their claims, he would promise them that he could get them contributor roles. He would put them on air. Obviously, that airtime is very precious if you got a books to sell or anything like that. And then he would pursue some kind of relationship with them, sexual relationship, romantic relationship. When they rebuffed his advances, he said, all right, well, I'm not helping you then. And I mean, I don't know that maybe you would say that's slimy, that's sleazy, and it's maybe perhaps Fox would say that's not behavior here that we like. But to say to roll that in with sexual assault or sexual harassment or sexual misconduct, I don't see it that way. It looks like he wanted something out of these women. He wanted a relationship with them. He was willing to offer them airtime. He was willing to say, I can get you a contract at Fox. When they said, but I also want to pursue a relationship with you. They say no. He says, all right, then forget it. I mean, I don't see how that fits in with the idea of the Harvey Weinsteins and Al Frankens of the world.
I mean,
who were physically assaulting people.
So O'Reilly settled out of court for $32 million. That was on sexual harassment, right? So, and because that particular case or cases are sealed, we don't know the full details of it. Is that right?
Yeah, we don't know the full cases. Again, I think he denies all of it. But just the very idea that the claim in and of itself is kind of proves itself. The claim proves itself. No, we're supposed to have a thing called due process in this country. So tearing down people just based on their claims, these women, many of them getting a lot of money. And then another element to this that isn't quite related to my book, Privileged Victims, but it is something that we've noticed here is that the purpose of a settlement is supposed to be that we walk away from this denying that there was any wrongdoing, or at least not talking about it. That's not the way they're operating anymore. They're doing the settlements, getting rich off of it, and then usually having their lawyer leak it to the media anyway. So that's just another element of this where we've seen that something that should be very, very serious, claims of sexual assault, claims of sexual misconduct, is being used in ways that to advance a lot of people's own interests. And I want to give you one more example of this. Actually, was because it was fairly recent. Was the author, the advice columnist E. Jean Carroll? What did she do? She had a book that she wanted to sell, so she comes out and puts into what was it, New York Magazine or New Yorker Magazine, that she had been 30 years ago or so that she was effectively raped. She wouldn't use the word rape, but did say raped by the way she described it, it certainly would be a rape, by the President of the United States. But she had a book to sell. You can get a lot of, and that's nothing to say of whether it's even true or not. But if you are going to use this to advance your own interest, I think it's certainly worth scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, when E. Jean Carroll came out with accusations against Donald Trump, it was a pretty explosive, at least within, say, like the CNN and MSNBC circles, some of the more left-wing outlets. But it didn't really go beyond that. Yeah, I think you wrote in Privileged Victims that once you have, say, a he said, she said, it's pretty much a stalemate at that point, and it doesn't really go anywhere.
Well, that's what it should be. But the effect, though, is that she then becomes a national figure overnight. She was on CNN and MSNBC almost every other hour for about a week after that. And then on top of that, yes, sold a ton of books. I think you can sell a lot of books by accusing the President of the United States of raping you.
So would you say that this idea, the believe all women, is sort of to try to break that tie break on the he said, she said?
Yeah, absolutely. It's get rid of due process now because we have victims here. They're the oppressed, they're the aggrieved. I think it's too bad for a lot of women because I think they don't see themselves as victims, and I don't think they want to be automatically or inherently viewed that way by society and by the country at large. They don't want to come in with that handicap for them. But it has its uses. It's very useful in a lot of cases.
Moving on to a few of the other individuals that you highlighted, Matt Lauer, for example. Kind of a similar case to Bill O'Reilly. I mean, you wrote that he was fired for, at least in your mind, what would be deemed unprofessional conduct, but not to the level of what they might be describing.
Right. That would, again, I think that if NBC determined that this is workplace conduct that is just, we don't want to see that here. There were consensual relationships that some of the women even admit to, at least one of them, actually two of them. I'll go into details in a second, but that they had consensual relationships. He says it was consensual. And maybe they were actually having sex in the office workplace. Maybe they were having sex on work trips. And maybe NBC says, you know what, we're not doing that here. We don't want any of that. But that's not what it was. It ended up being, the story was told as though this is another Me Too thing. This is someone who's taking advantage of a woman. He's abusing them, and we're supposed to believe that this is happening everywhere. No, actually, when the story first came out about Matt Lauer, there was only one woman on the record who talked about all the allegations of the sexual misconduct in the workplace, sexual harassment, in some case sexual assault. The one who was on the record said this was a consensual relationship. He denied everything. He said, maybe I hurt people. He was like, but that was never my intent. Denies any kind of misconduct or inappropriate behavior with women. And then not until the case that really brought him down was the one at the 2014 Sochi Olympics, where a woman said that he basically sexually assaulted her there. That was the one that basically got him fired. It's months later, maybe even a year later, that woman comes out publicly, and I think Ronan Farrow's book, and says, well, he raped me, but I thereafter went back to him for sex that I think she described it as transactional, but that's another word, I think, for consensual. Mm-hmm. So that he gets fired for all these anonymous accounts that we've heard. We haven't heard, if let's say they found something internally and they haven't released that information, I guess that's always possible. This is based on what we know publicly.
Shifting gears a little bit, you have a chapter in Privileged Victims that focuses on the Democratic Party as it currently stands. And you write that they're having an intersectionality problem. Mm-hmm. Just expand a little bit on that. What exactly is this intersectionality problem?
Yeah, so that's a word that a lot of your listeners and viewers probably have heard before, come across, much like a lot of the concepts I talk about in my book, Privileged Victims, but people just kind of don't understand what they mean, and they seem very academic. But again, that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. That's actually where all of it comes from. The college campuses, that's what they're teaching. Intersectionality is just the concept. This is basically what the defining characteristic of social justice ideology. It's the idea that you have different forms of oppression, or certain people can claim different forms of oppression and different degrees of oppression. For example, you might have two women, but one's a black woman, so she has two forms of oppression. She's both a woman and she's black. You can then have two men, let's say, but one's white and one is also white but gay. So he has the sexuality. Yeah. So yeah, right, exactly. That this is like kind of a hierarchy of how they rank who's more oppressed, therefore more, the assumption is then inherently good, innately more moral. They have a higher morality, and you can't ever, as someone who doesn't have those forms of oppression or grievance or victimhood, you basically have to shut up and let them talk about their experience. They get to tell you their story. You really are expected to not have an opinion on it at all. So that's what intersectionality is. That's basically what governs the Democratic Party now. Again, I think that it's going to be only a matter of time before the Democratic Party is called the Social Justice Party of America. It will no longer be the Democratic Party. But if anyone who watched any of the debates or really seen any of the interviews with any of the candidates, that's kind of, you're just constantly hearing about which niche group that's been oppressed that they're going to look after. I mean, I think Bernie Sanders is trying to run away with it by, he said on the debate stage in New Hampshire, America is a racist society from top to bottom. Every single aspect of the country is racist, and we have to fix that. But it even gets absurd to a large degree. Back when Julian Castro was still in the race, he said something about trans women needing access to abortion. I don't think he understands that trans women don't have the inner plumbing to need abortions. But again, that's how absurd it can get. They end up tying themselves in knots, trying to acknowledge all the various forms of oppression, whether they're talking about women and Me Too and how they need child care is something they absolutely need, or you're talking about violence against trans people. And I have an entire chapter in my book about the trans issue. Trans is the entire idea that you can be something that you're not and call yourself something you're not, and everyone else is supposed to acknowledge it and believe it. That is only made possible by social justice, that ideology, that way of thinking, that way of viewing the world. You could not have the whole trans concept without social justice. So yes, the intersectionality stuff, social justice in general, that's what's running the Democratic Party now. We've been seeing it throughout the 2020 election. But you would even see it with the new stars of the Democratic Party, the squad as they call themselves, AOC, Ilhan Omar, who's and the other two,
Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley.
Right. There is virtually nothing that distinguishes them other than the fact that they claim victimhood on everything. Everything is how you have a Latina woman. She's been oppressed that way. You have a Muslim woman. She's been oppressed on those two counts. On and on and on. So and also Ilhan Omar, I don't think that she would have a word to say if she couldn't say the word racism. She would be a complete mute if she couldn't call someone a racist. So that's, again, but they're the stars. They're the ones who get all the attention in the national media. They're on glossy magazines. They're raved about on cable news. And that's another example of the elevation of our worst people.
Yeah, you had a confrontation back in November 2018 as the the squad was forming after the 2018 midterm election. So you had a particular tweet of and a photo of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she was then representative-elect. The tweet read, and there's a photo. Hill staffer sent me this pic of Ocasio-Cortez they took just now. I'll tell you something, that jacket and coat don't look like a girl who struggles. Looking back on that, because you received a lot of heat from that, even from me. I was critical of the tweet openly.
You're forgiven.
Thank you, Eddie. How do you look back on that now?
I look back on it the same way I look back on any time I get blowback on Twitter. It's usually from these social justice maniacs. Present company excluded. But the biggest probably criticism that was lobbed at me, or the assumptions that were made about me, and I get this to this day. It's as if my picture isn't right there. They say, well, you're a straight white male that has privilege, so who are you to comment on someone's clothing or to comment on anything about their appearance? And straight white male, I'm only one of those things. So I get 2 oppression points. I get to claim some sense of grievance if I want to, or if we're going to play that game. And that was the reason I included that anecdote or that experience in my book, was because if this is going to be an oppression off or a grievance off, I can hang with the best of them. I think that, but again, that's the charge. That's the way you get people to shut up, is you say, well, you have the privilege, and then therein you grant yourself privileges, which is usually immunity to say whatever you want or to have to go unquestioned, unchallenged. Otherwise, she made me a little famous for a while, so I liked that.
You said that the one regret you had, you wrote in Privileged Victims, that you deleted the tweet.
Mm-hmm. Well, because and this is just a social media thing that we see, is that when you're under fire in this kind of way, if you do something like delete it, it just starts all over again. And that's you get the cascade of people yelling at you in your mentions on Twitter. That's where this all happens, on Twitter. And it sure enough, that's what happened. I think AOC then retweeted the fact that I deleted it, or she screenshot it or something, and then she said, "Oh, do you think you can do this without apologizing?" But then actually thereafter, and I talk about this in the book, is that she was obsessed with this episode, and so were many of her supporters. They talked about it all the time and she used it as if I was saying she didn't deserve to be in Congress because She looked nice. I wasn't. It was the thing that was so confusing about it. I think this will go down in history as the first time that it's taken as an insult to be told that you don't look like you're struggling. Like, if anything, that would be I wouldn't mind hearing that about myself. But no, that in the context, by the way, again, she had just been elected, was not sworn in yet. The context was that she had talked about her humble background and how she fueled her campaign by the slog, and just portrayed herself as someone of a more humble background. And then on top of that, I think the day before, she had just said that she was being confused for an intern. And now I've been an intern in DC, and I can tell you I did not look as sharply dressed as she did. Obviously, I'm not comparing the way we would dress, but I remember really, really, really was struggling. And so that was kind of the context in my mind. I gather it didn't probably come across as well. But again, that's she used that to portray herself over and over again as a victim, oppressed, aggrieved by, as her supporters erroneously believed, a straight white privileged male.
I also remember that there was a particular report, or at least she said it, I think openly, was that in the months between, or the 2 months between her election and her actually getting sworn in, she was basically trying to live off of her savings.
Right.
And I think that was also possible, I think, in the back of your mind as well, right?
Yeah, that was. And the one thing I will concede on this that I got criticism for, I don't care that there was a picture and people can say whatever they want about it. Again, I didn't even take the picture. Mm-hmm. Someone was happy to see this new celebrity in DC, took the picture, sent it to me, I posted. That is an elected official in their workplace. I don't care if people think that was creepy, that I as a journalist would post that. I would say that there were a lot of journalists that were critical of doing journalism, strangely enough. But the one criticism I did get that I thought was that I didn't think of and I hadn't anticipated was you can go to like a Marshalls or a TJ Maxx and actually look very good for very little bit of money. And I thought, I didn't think about that. That's true.
I mean, you'd be surprised how much I can get with $50, pretty much this entire outfit. But I want to get back a little bit to more of the Democrats' intersectionality problem because, of course, there are a lot of candidates who fizzled out. We're basically down to Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. And you can also include Tulsi Gabbard if you really wanted to. But you wrote about Beto O'Rourke, Pete Buttigieg, Kirsten Gillibrand, Eric Swalwell, Cory Booker. All of them in particular almost made it painfully obvious that they were trying to reach and say appeal to some very niche part of the population that doesn't really earn you points really, but maybe earn you points on the mainstream level.
Yeah.
What exactly do you think was the most egregious example?
I think, again, that Julian Castro one where he talked about the trans women who need access to abortion care.
That's the one.
That's the one I always remember. But I think the most memorable experience for me was when Beto O'Rourke was really, really having a hard time getting any traction. And so and a big part of that was because he wasn't doing any national news interviews. He went on The View. And basically, and I use this term in my book, he subjected himself to a struggle session. A struggle session, it comes from, actually, that has roots in like Maoist China. And just the whole idea is that if you stray from the party line, the party that's in, the governing party of China, I think they had something very similar in Russia too, in the Soviet Union, is that you have to then be in public, you subject yourself to public criticism and ridicule and humiliation. That's how they kind of used to.
The one when they put the dunce hat on?
Like that, yeah. So it's just meant to embarrass you, humiliate you, remind you that you don't stray from the party line in this country. And that's basically how social justice works. It works by embarrassing you, criticizing you intensely, making you, basically beating you into submission through calling you a racist, a sexist, or homophobe, bigot. But he went on The View to basically have his own struggle session, is what I write in Privileged Victims. But he goes on there to apologize for the privileges he's enjoyed in life, being white, having said, he made a comment that I still never really understood the controversy behind it, but he said, my wife stays home with the kids and I help her sometimes, or something like that.
Yes.
And I never really understood, but he apologized for that. He just had to sit there and take in every one of the women of The View is just berating him over the thing and asking him, do you apologize for that? Are you apologizing for that? Do you want to say you're sorry? And he did every single one of them. I remember that scene was just, it was like, it was watching a live castration.
Wow. And that's graphic detail. And finally, now that we're down to two final candidates, or at least major candidates, and Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, and you look at how the landscape has sort of shaken out, do you think the Democratic Party is really about embracing the people that they're catering to, given the fact that the last two remaining candidates, or major candidates vying for the presidency in the Democratic Party, are white men, albeit obviously Bernie Sanders is Jewish?
Right. Yeah, no, I think that there's the first and foremost, what's important is not that the people who are embracing this social justice sickness, that they necessarily reflect the qualities they're talking about. You don't have to be you don't have to appeal to the social justice crew, the mob, by being a black, gay, trans person. They don't have to elect a black, gay, trans person in order to prove that this is the ideology that they're trying to push on the rest of the country. They just need the candidates to basically embrace the idea. That's, again, I believe that's why Bernie Sanders, and I noticed, I don't think he really talked about this while I was writing my book. It wasn't until recently that I noticed, again, that he said this is a racist country from top to bottom. On his website, he has a thing on there that's all about racial justice and how every policy we consider needs to be done through a racial lens, and correcting for our past mistakes with regard to race, but every other form of oppression, if you want to call it that, whether it's being gay, being trans, being a woman, and I think that, but that's why he's so loud about advocating for these things, because he knows that that's what's going on with the party. That's the direction it's been heading. Joe Biden himself, he came onto the scene apologizing for being white, basically. He apologized for his role in the Clarence Thomas hearings. He did a lot of apologizing and atoning for his sins. Mike Bloomberg jumps in apologizing for stop and frisk.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that may show that the party is not completely gone, not completely ruled by this, though I think it is now that the Democratic establishment has thrown all in with Joe Biden, they're trying to crush Bernie Sanders like a roach. There is some sign that that's not too far gone. I'm not hopeful, but no. To answer your point, I don't think you have to prove that you're black or you're a woman. You don't have to be those things. But actually, to the point, Joe Biden, there was a report just this week that said his campaign is pretty much settled on the fact that they have to pick a black woman as his VP. So there you go. Whether she's qualified or not is that's going to be completely secondary. It's going to be that's the identity that we have to get to really run this show.
So that narrows it down to Stacey Abrams, Kamala Harris.
Such a privileged victim, by the way. Stacey Abrams. What exactly did she do to advance in any kind of way? She lost her race, but now she goes around the country as a celebrity, by the way, complaining about how she was the victim of the election was stolen from her, sexism, racism, all those things. So she's a really good example of what's going on in this country and when I talk about it in Privileged Victims.
Well, the book is Privileged Victims: How America's Culture Fascists Hijacked the Country and Elevated Its Worst People. Eddie Scarry, the author and commentary writer for the Washington Examiner, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.